Zipper rolls out to the right, pitches off to Taylor, and Taylor's to the 20, down to the 15, down to the 10, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Touchdown, Billy Taylor! Billy Taylor scored a touchdown from 21 yards out. The crowd goes berserk. It was November 22nd, 1969. That they came to Barry, Michigan, all dressed in maize and blue. The words were said, the prayers were read, and everybody cried. But when they closed the coffin, there was someone else inside. Oh, they came to Barry, Michigan, but Michigan wasn't dead. And when the game was over, it was someone else instead. 11 Michigan Wolverines put on the gloves of gray, and as the organ played the victors, they laid Woody Hayes away. Under center is Wangler at the 45. He goes back. He's looking for a receiver. He throws downfield to Carter. Who's got it better than us? Nobody!
Welcome to the Michigan Man Podcast on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew, for Wolverine fans from coast to coast. Go Blue and welcome to the show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. This Saturday, Scott Frost and his Nebraska team roll into the Big House to open the Big Ten season. They are 0-2, but my guest today says they could easily be undefeated. Joining us in just a minute on our visitors segment will be Ben McLaughlin, who is the sideline reporter on the Husker radio network and also hosts the pre- and post-game shows on that network. First, my view from Section 17. After 3 games, I am not sure how good we are. We are an 18-point favorite on Saturday, but, who cares about that other than the bettors? I thought after 3 games I'd have a better feel for what kind of team we have, but I do not. I'm still concerned about the offensive line play, the penalties, and the defense allowing third down conversions, and even the conservative play calling. I'm hoping we are ready to turn the corner with this offense and even let Shea Patterson throw a bit more to open up the run game. In the end, I just want to see progress on Saturday and get the Big Ten portion of the schedule started on the right foot. Husker sideline reporter Ben McLaughlin says Nebraska is just 1 or 2 boneheaded plays away from being undefeated. He thinks they match up pretty well with Michigan, but, and this is a big but, if they don't clean up the penalties and mental mistakes, they have no chance to win on Saturday. He joins me next here on our visitors segment on the Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V-Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Joining us on our visitors segment this week to talk about the big game Saturday in the Big House, Husker Radio sideline reporter and pre- and post-game host Ben McLaughlin. Ben, great to have you with us.
Great to be with you. Appreciate you having me.
Well, the first thing Michigan fans are wondering about, and I'm sure Huskers fans also, freshman quarterback Adrian Martinez. From what we hear, he practiced on Monday. Not sure about today. Tuesday is when we're recording. Is he still a day-to-day for Saturday, Ben?
I would say so. I think, the logic we used last week, for any quarterback, let alone a freshman who has only made 1 start, you don't practice on Monday, you don't practice on Tuesday, you don't practice on Wednesday. The likelihood of him playing was slim to none. Although the coaches remained that, he was day-to-day, and, we watched him go through warm-ups and, dressed out with a knee brace. So, we thought maybe he might play. But, I think the logic, same logic, just different way to apply it, right? He's practicing yesterday. I think if he goes through practice this morning and then, Wednesday, I think the reverse effect is there. I think the probability is much, much higher, but I don't know that we'll really know until he turns loose. Coach Frost did say yesterday in his press conference that until the trainer says that he can play without further injuring his knee, then he's going to be out. But he is going through practice, and that is a good sign for Husker fans.
Well, he sounds like a very talented young quarterback, Ben. Talk about him and how much he means to this offense, even though he's just a freshman and even though he's only played one game.
I'm really not quite sure how much he means to the offense. I don't know that we know that quite yet. I mean, he's only made one start, but just in terms of how he got here, interesting story. He was a Tennessee commit. Really had his eye on Nebraska when he first started looking at colleges in Fresno, but Mike Riley and the Nebraska staff didn't want a quarterback in this class in particular, which really turned Adrian off to Nebraska, which is kind of bizarre to have a kid from Fresno, California, even on Nebraska's radar. It was different. But I think Adrian, commits to Tennessee, and I don't know that he ever felt comfortable with that commitment. And then, Scott Frost wins the game with Memphis in the AAC championship game, then of course beats Auburn in the bowl game for the undefeated season, and then Coach Verduzco, our quarterback coach, gives Adrian a call, and everything changed from there. He basically committed sight unseen without coming to Lincoln, and signed on the early signing period, and the rest is history. Terrific young man. He lost his mom, when he was a kid, and that adversity really kind of helped him handle some of the things that he's had to go through. He didn't play football his senior year in high school. He had labrum surgery with his shoulder. So that was the other thing, is he hadn't played in a football game in nearly 2 years. So I think all in all, we're very pleased with what we've seen. But I think the opening line to Adrian Martinez's story, it's just the introduction. I mean, we still got a lot of his book to write.
Well, it's a transition year for Nebraska football, and we know how excited the fan base is to have Coach Frost back as head coach now. But I've been reading that there hasn't been a total buy-in from all the players yet, but that's not surprising with a new coach in the first year, is it, Ben?
No, I don't know that's all surprising, and I don't know that it's kids not buying in. I mean, I think they think they're bought in. I think they're saying that they're bought in, but when it comes to actually doing the things that it means to be bought in, right? Going to class,
right,
showing up to meetings, wearing the right things, not missing team meals, all of those little things that we talk about that lead to mistakes on Saturdays. I think it's kind of putting money where your mouth is right now. I think everybody's saying the right things and everyone's doing the right things in the weight room, but how are you acting when no one's looking? I think that's the culture change that we're waiting to see the entire team. Now, you see it with the leaders, you see it with the guys that are prominent in this program, but how do you see it with the special teams guys? How do you see it with the second team guys? I think, you can say you're bought in all you want, but until you really change how you are, Coach Frost talked about, what do you do when you get home from practice? Are you staying up playing video games or watching TV or watching Netflix, or are you going to bed when you're supposed to? Those types of things that really need to take shape. And, it's 3 years of lack of accountability and lack of responsibility in this program under Coach Riley that they're trying to erase. And I think that part of it is what's going to take some time.
Well, it is going to take time, and Scott, of course, is going to need time to get his players in. Recruiting very good so far for the class of 2019. But right now, as this team, does Nebraska have the talent to be competitive in the Big Ten the rest of the way?
I think so. I mean, I think it's more than just a talent issue. I think the big thing that's been lacking in our program hasn't necessarily been the recruiting. I mean, they haven't had the recruiting classes that Michigan has had. They haven't had, the Alabama classes, but they've been right around anywhere between 15 and 25 in the national recruiting rankings, which on paper should be more than enough to compete on the field. What's really been lacking in our program is the player development. It's hard to look at, players when they come in to when they leave and say that they're significantly better football players. And that's a huge problem. That's what made Nebraska great, in the 90s was, they didn't always have the athletes that they had in Florida or in Texas or California or whatever, but they could develop players, the walk-on program, all of those things made Nebraska great. And they've gone away from that, and they haven't had the ability to develop the players. So they like the guys they have in right now. I think Coach Frost would love, a couple of recruiting classes, as you said, under his belt to get more of scheme fit guys. But I think right now, I mean, Nebraska's plenty talented to compete in the Big Ten. It's just, can they develop them? Can they get rid of the mindset of losing? I think right now that's the biggest problem with Nebraska.
Well, the offense has run the ball pretty well in the first 2 games, but keeps shooting itself in the foot with mistakes and penalties. Talk about this Husker offense, some of the issues that they're working through right now.
Yeah, I mean, I think you said it. I think the first 2 games, for the Michigan fans that haven't watched Nebraska yet, I mean, the frustrating part is, Nebraska's two plays away from being 2-0. They had a bad, boneheaded penalty against Colorado on defense on 3rd and a mile that set up their go-ahead touchdown, and they allowed a punt return touchdown against Troy that ended up being the difference in the game. But, I think the main difference from week 1 to week 2, well, our week 1 and week 2, because we had our first game canceled, it was Nebraska was behind the sticks all day against Troy, whether it be a holding penalty, a false start, a negative first down play. I mean, with a walk-on quarterback making his first start at Nebraska and Andrew Bunch, that's a ridiculously amount of pressure to put on his shoulders as a quarterback to be 2nd and 16, 3rd and 12 all day long. And I think that's made Nebraska's life really problematic against Troy on Saturday. And if they want any chance to win against Michigan, they have to stay ahead of the sticks and not shoot themselves in the foot, as you said, with the penalties and just the miscues early in the possession.
Well, other than Adrian Martinez and, of course, outstanding receiver J.D. Spielman, who are some of the other key players we're going to see for this Huskers offense on Saturday?
Well, Stanley Morgan's going to be the most decorated Husker wide receiver in history by the time he's done here. J.D. Spielman, as you mentioned. I think the interesting thing is going to be, besides who the quarterback is what Nebraska does at running back. Greg Bell, junior college transfer from Arizona Western, has been Nebraska's workhorse. They have a really exciting freshman in Maurice Washington, who's just electrifying every time he gets the ball. He was a really late enrollee. He had some academic things he needed to get cleaned up before he made it to Lincoln, so he missed all of spring. He missed all of the summer conditioning, so he really didn't have that buffer time that most freshmen have to get in the weight room and add some weight on him. So he's kind of thin, but man, he's something special when he gets the ball in his hands. But I think, the cop-out answer is going to be the offensive line. They were awful against Troy. And with that front 7 that Michigan has, if they don't do their job, then it doesn't matter who Nebraska has. They could have Barry Sanders back there, and it wouldn't matter. So I think of everybody that can play well and can make big plays, I think it's going to start up front.
Well, over on the other side of the ball for the Huskers, the D has been really good against the run, but the secondary, man, they've had their issues, haven't they, Ben?
Yeah, the secondary was a big concern coming in. I think that was they had 4 scholarship corners when this staff took over. So that was a big problem. I think they did a good job going in and addressing some of those needs. Colorado, I think, threw it 51 times. Anytime you throw it 51 times, you're going to have some success. A lot of the yards, I felt like, this defense is structured in a boom or bust type scenario where they're either getting to the pass or they're allowing some yards. Nebraska's going to give up yards. It's just the way that it is. But it's the sacks, it's the TFLs, and Nebraska finally got their first turnover against Troy. That's what's going to make this defense great under Coach Shenander. And I felt like the front 7 has played well. I think DiCaprio Boodle has played very well at corner. And Lamar Jackson, they think, is an NFL-type body. So, I know that the secondary numbers don't look great, but in terms of talent, I like what they have there. They're going to have their hands full with Michigan again. But, that's going to be interesting to see how this thing comes together with how Nebraska runs things on defense and how Michigan chooses to attack them.
With us on our visitors segment this week, as we look forward to a visit from the Huskers on Saturday, is radio sideline reporter and pre- and post-game host Ben McLaughlin. Ben, looking ahead to this Saturday's game, Michigan is an 18-point favorite. Whoever is at quarterback, is it Adrian Martinez or is it Andrew Bunch? What problems do you think this Nebraska offense can pose for the Michigan defense?
Well, I think we've yet to kind of see how Coach Frost's scheme can expose defenses, but I would just say where it can hurt anybody is just in the minds of the coaches. I think they know this offense so well that you've seen it perform well against really good defenses in the past. Auburn had one of the best defenses in the country in their bowl game, and they found a way to get yards. Now a lot of that was McKenzie Milton, their dynamic quarterback they had in Orlando at UCF. making things happen. But, I trust the coaches to put together a plan to at least give themselves a shot at being successful. Their scheme, it'll be interesting to see how it works against Michigan's very physical front seven and how big and talented those guys are. But, with the personnel that Nebraska has and the coaches that they have, I'm intrigued to see how the offensive scheme works against a defense like this. I think that's the thing that I think Husker fans are kind of holding on to is Coach Frost's, this offensive mind. That's how he's kind of defined. How can he put together a plan against Michigan? If there's any source of optimism, I think it's just, trusting him and trusting, they can put some plays they could find weaknesses and somewhere in Michigan's defense. That group is just so good, front end, back end, doesn't matter. I mean, they're so good. I think Coach Frost is going to have to come up with a plan, and I think right now that's the one thing giving Nebraska hope is that he has had success against good defenses, and we're going to have to see it go to work because we've yet to see it against Colorado or Troy.
Well, Coach Frost said at his Monday presser the Huskers have to play near perfect, he thought, to beat Michigan. If they can clean up the mistakes and if Martinez can play, right now, does Nebraska have, do you think, enough pieces to come into Ann Arbor and make this a game Saturday?
Well, I certainly hope so. I mean, I think that's the goal, is to just go be as competitive as you can. And, one thing's for sure, the things that have just killed Nebraska in the first two games has been the miscues. I mean, we talked about earlier, the penalties. They've put the ball on the carpet way too much, whether the other teams recovered them or not. It's just been sloppy at times. The special teams have been bad. They've been missing field goals. Kick coverage hasn't been good. Their starting field position has been awful. I think all those things need to be fixed, and it's hard to imagine, those 6 or 7 things that I just rattled off to all be fixed before Saturday, but they're going to have to be if they want any shot. I think personnel-wise, they can stack up with Michigan. I don't feel like they're going to walk into the game completely outmanned and outmatched, but this is a front seven game. I mean, of everything I mentioned, whoever wins the turnover battle is going to have the biggest chance, but it's going to be won or lost in the front seven on both sides of the ball, and Nebraska understands that. Coach Frost understands that. But yeah, I mean, the last thing you want is to go on your first road game and get blown out. I think, being competitive is something that's very important to our fans with how things have gone, in Lincoln the past few years. Getting blown out happens way too much, and especially against nationally ranked teams like Michigan is. It'd be nice to see him go compete and give him a fight for 4 quarters.
Well, final question for you, Ben. I know, as you mentioned, fans are very excited that Coach Frost is back at home. And you wonder, I mean, he turned things around really fast at UCF in his second year. I read that he even said he and his staff did not expect that to happen. What are the realistic expectations for this Nebraska team this year?
Well, I think it's changed over the last 3 weeks. I mean, losing the game to Akron really hurt. I know the athletic department's really trying hard to find that 12th game on the schedule somewhere. But then losing to Colorado in a close one, and then losing to Troy, I think a lot of people thought going into this game with Michigan, Nebraska would be 3-0 or 2-1. Instead, they're winless. So I think that's certainly changed people's perspective. I think before the year, I would say on average, fans thought between 6 and 7 wins. I think now is probably between 5 and 7, 5 and 6. I think 5 and 6 wins on the year. I think that's the realistic expectation. Nebraska has the most difficult conference schedule they've ever had in any league. I think that's saying something. Playing on the road at Ohio State, playing on the road at Michigan, playing on the road at Wisconsin, and at Iowa. I mean, that's ridiculous. So they've got a really tough schedule in front of them. Some of their more winnable games are already behind them. So I think it's going to be really hard. The math's becoming difficult to find their way to a bowl game, but it's why you play the games on Saturdays.
Yeah, absolutely. And the last time these two teams met was November of 2013. Michigan was favored, but Nebraska came in, walked away with a 17-13 win. So we'll see on Saturday when things kick off at 12 noon in the Big House. For now, we'd like to thank our guest today for being so generous with his time, Ben McLaughlin, who we will see roaming the sidelines with microphone in hand on Saturday as part of the Husker Sports radio team. So, Ben, thanks for your time, and we hope to have you back in the future.
You bet. I appreciate you having me. Thank you.
Quick Hits is next as we wrap it up for another week here on The Michigan Man on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. On Quick Hits today, good news on the injury front. Karan Higdon and Chris Evans have both been practicing this week and should be good to go for Saturday. We picked up another big-time verbal this week for the class of 2019. Five-star safety Daxton Hill picked us over Alabama, Oklahoma, and Oklahoma State. He became the 23rd commit in the class of 2019, which is ranked in the top 10. Here are a few game day facts. Both teams have won 4 games in this series, and there has been one tie. The first game in the series was played here in Ann Arbor on October 21st of 1905, a 31-0 Michigan win. Scott Frost is in his first year as head man at his alma mater. He is 0-2 this season, 19-9 overall in 3 years as a head coach. The Huskers were 3-6 in the Big Ten last year, 4-8 overall. They have 6 starters back on offense, 8 on defense. We should have a good weather day on Saturday. The weatherman says partly sunny and low to mid-60s, no rain in the forecast. A reminder that you can get our free show app from the Google Play and iTunes stores. You can also hear us on iHeart, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, and Wolverine Sports Radio. Next week we head to Evanston at a 4:30 p.m. kickoff against a struggling Northwestern team. They're on a bye this week. On Tuesday, beat writer Aaron McMann from MLive will join us on our game day show. Then on Thursday's Visitors Edition, our guest will be Teddy Greenstein from the Chicago Tribune. Many of you probably know Teddy from seeing him as a studio analyst on BTN. He also covers Northwestern for the Tribune. It seems like every time we play at Ryan Field, at least in the last 20 years or so, the games are shootouts. Pat Fitzgerald will have his team ready to play coming out of the bye week, that is for certain. That will do it for today's show. I'm your host, Mike Fitzpatrick. Thanks for listening, and make sure you tell your Michigan family and friends about the show. Have a great Wolverine weekend, everyone. Think victory, beat Nebraska. Until next time, take care, and as always, go blue. Thanks for joining us today on The Michigan Man, here on Wolverine Sports Radio, a member of the V Sporto Network, and in partnership with SB Nation's Maize and Brew. Our listener lines are open 24/7 for your calls at 313-263-4842. That's 313-263-4842. Or email us at themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. That's themichiganmanpodcast@yahoo.com. The Michigan Man Podcast is produced at the studios of Robin Lynn Productions, Allen Park, Michigan, and is not affiliated with the University of Michigan. Go Blue!